You're listening to the Complete Human podcast, hosted by co-founders Janna and Evan DeMarco. We share authentic conversations about wellness, longevity, personal growth, and biooptimization, along with inspiring stories that encourage community and social responsibility. We hope you enjoy this episode.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of the Complete Human podcast with your hosts,
Janna
and Evan DeMarco. As we kind of kick off our whole, physical health principle platform, we're excited to chat with our next guest, someone I've known for a couple of years through my Mindshare group. I kind of consider her like the Mick Jagger of the medical community. With just better tattoos. So stoked to welcome Dr. Tyna Moore.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, you guys.
So we've got a lot to uncover in a short amount of time. Now, one of the things that we do want to talk about is COVID, because it's on everybody's mind. We're in day 7 million of the COVID debacle. And obviously, there's a lot of things that as a physician you can and can't say. So, what we want to let our audience know ahead of time is that if I ask something, which is most likely going to happen, that you can't answer, the safe word for our podcast has and always will be cinnamon.
Okay.
so just, Dr. Tyna and listeners, as you know, if someone says cinnamon, we're just going to move on to the next topic.
This is
fair enough.
This is just like ridiculous.
What?
You love the cinnamon.
I love the cinnamon. I do. It's better than turmeric.
You got to have a safe word.
Yes, exactly. It's true in podcasting in all areas of life.
Fair enough.
So, like I said, we'll intro you a little bit later, but would love for you to introduce yourselves to our audience.
Sure. So I am a naturopathic physician and a chiropractic doctor, and I have been in practice for well over a decade, recently closing up my clinical practice the last few years just to get into other endeavors in life because life is short, and I decided to see what life was like outside of a clinic. I've been in the clinical setting literally my entire life, whether as a patient or as assisting a physician or reception, running an office for different doctors. So I've been in it. I've been in the allopathic system for a long time. I've been in the naturopathic system for a long time. And I've just kind of seen it all come and go and come again. And this was really interesting, just this phenomenon around this virus. I have a unique background in that I have suffered from chronic viral infections and post-viral syndromes my whole life. And so, and I got really sick when I was 19 and almost died of cytomegalovirus. So viruses became a particular interest for me. And if you ask any naturopathic physician who's been in practice for any given amount of time, they're really well versed in treating chronic post-viral syndromes. That's kind of what we do. That's a very large part of most doctor or naturopathic doctors' practices. My particular interest in medicine was in regenerative injection therapies and regenerative medicine. And so I was doing treatments like platelet-rich plasma a long time ago, well before it was popularized, well before Mindshare had even heard of the word stem cell. I was in that world. And so that's predominantly what my practice has been around. However, I've had a really broad practice as well. I've treated, I tend to, and we invite in what we reflect. And so I've treated a lot of autoimmune, a lot of bioidentical hormone, just kind of the whole thing. And so optimizing a patient's terrain is first and foremost on the naturopathic doctor's radar. And that's where I think, me just jumping into this whole COVID thing online happened, and I had a video go viral, and it's just kind of been history from there. So what you're seeing me pump out really is not necessarily what my clinical wheelhouse is, but a very particular personal interest and one I have a lot of experience in.
Great. And I want to jump back, I want to get to the stuff that you've been posting online, but I want to kind of rewind a little bit and talk about your experience, talk about your path. And really, I think you've been very vocal outside of COVID in really identifying the failures of Western medicine. And I'd love for you to chat a little bit about that and kind of what your belief is, around that and how naturopathic doctors and chiropractors have really embraced a more holistic approach to medicine that clearly, modern doctors of the modern Western system has ignored for so long.
Yeah, that's a great question. If you go back in time, naturopathic medicine was brought to the United States by medical doctors from different countries. So naturopathic medicine in and of itself stems out of old school allopathic medicine, which before there were fancy tests for everything and drugs, you know, a pill for every ill model, we had to work with what we had. And that came down to just optimizing the patient's terrain. I'm less interested in a condition or diagnosis that a patient has, and I'm far more interested in why they're presenting with that, right? Like, I want to know what the cause is. If a good example is asthma, people can relate to that one. Why are somebody's bronchioles clamping down? Why are they having this immune response? Why is it self-perpetuating? What are the environmental factors that are contributing? That's far more interesting to me than whether they should be on a inhaler full of steroids or an inhaler full of albuterol, right? Mm-hmm. Or both. Like, that's symptom management versus root cause. And that's where functional medicine stemmed out of. Jeffrey Bland brought naturopathic medicine to the MD community, and that's where functional medicine came from. So they are now our allies in all of this. And I'm far more concerned with the homeostasis of a patient than I am about what symptoms they're presenting with. And so if you look at it that way, and I'm not of the school that viruses aren't real. I know some people really have been doubling down on that. I do believe in viruses. I don't believe that a virus kills a person. I believe that their immune system kills them ultimately, right? Their immunologic response to a virus, or to any condition for that matter, is what's going to dictate how this whole thing turns out for them. That stems from their terrain and how their overall inflammation is, how their overall nutritional status is, how their sleep and stress management is, how their lifestyle is. And all of those things are what I treat. I treat people. I don't treat conditions. And so that's the difference between this reductionistic allopathic model. And I have to say, our brothers and sisters in allopathic medicine are absolutely necessary. And if I'm dying, I want them on my team, right? And I am beyond grateful. Antibiotics have saved my life more than once. And so I am beyond grateful for that.
I can relate. Yeah.
Right. Like, it's a great system of medicine if you're in an urgent situation. I was fortunate enough to hang out with an emergency room physician who had 25, 30 years experience. When I was on vacation once, I was hanging out with him and his family. And he said to me, I don't have a clue what to do for somebody to optimize their health and to keep them out of my emergency room. But when they're there, I know how to save their life. And I was like, that's it, right? Like, that's the difference in my head. And so hopefully the audience, that makes sense.
I think it's two sides of the same coin, right? It's, they aren't bifurcated. They are essential, but it's, be well until you need the emergency or till you need something else, rather than, Band-Aid for the broken leg, which is kind of the current model.
Right.
There's definitely a place for both to work synergistically. Yeah.
Or we'd be dead. I'd be dead. Yeah. My family would be dead. But another example is my mother came down with a very serious case of gastrointestinal issues last summer. It was really severe, like bordering on possibly Crohn's or other autoimmune conditions. And in the allopathic system, she was dying, and I had to pull out my tools and my regenerative tools in particular, and she's stabilized now and she's okay. But we used a lot of allopathic Western medicine to get her through, combined with what I do. And I think it's a nice marriage of both when patients can access both. Well, I realize that's not an option for everyone, but taking good care of yourself will never go out of style.
No. And we've just become such a reactive society. And I think that's one of the things that we're really focused on changing, is getting people to be proactive with their health, rather than, oh, okay, well, now I've got a major problem. Let's go to the ER and have a triage doctor try to fix me, or try to undo 10, 15, 20, 30 years worth of bad habits.
Right.
Yeah, how can we optimize sooner and be preventative so we can avoid things in the future? Because it's not fun all of a sudden to be hit with a bunch of health issues, right? And then having the stress of, how do I deal with this now? If we can optimize our systems and be preventative in the beginning, I feel like you're better off. And it kind of comes down to like dealing with viruses too. I mean, you want to make sure you are solid to start with, so you can battle that if you need to.
Hey guys, I want to chat with you about inflammation. Exciting topic, right? But bottom line, inflammation is the root cause of all disease. And as we age, resolving inflammation gets a little harder. Having spent the last 10 years of my life hyper-focused on the science of aging and how inflammation plays a role in that process, something we now call inflammaging, I really wanted to understand how to fight back. You see, in all of that research, I kept coming back to these unique biologically active compounds called pre-resolving mediators. These pre-resolving mediators, or PRMs, derived from EPA, DHA, and DPA, support the resolution of inflammation, allowing your body to return to homeostasis. I'm proud to announce that Complete Human has launched PRM Response, a pre-resolving mediator product with the highest concentrations of these unique biologically active compounds on the market. So check out store.completehuman.com and use coupon code PRM20 to save 20% off your first order. Fight back against inflammation with PRM Response.
Absolutely. It's the overreactive immunologic response or underreactive, or a combination of both usually, which is tanking these people out. I saw Sanjay Gupta speaking this morning on CNN online, and he said that, you know, he does a nice job of keeping things relatively objective, but there was still that like fear, mainstream media, fear mongering kind of play to it, slant to it. And he said 840 people under the age of 30 have died of COVID so far. So it's not just old people. And I was like, that's a pretty small percentage of the 200+ thousand. If you do the math,
very small,
right? Very small percentage. And I was like, if anyone's actually stopping to do the math, I mean, that's immediately what I did, is went to my calculator and did the math. And I was like, that's really minimal when you look at the overall death rate. And I'm not minimizing the death rate. We don't want to lose our elderly. But this is just a macrocosmic example of what was already going on. People were already dying at exorbitant rates from chronic health conditions that were predominantly lifestyle diseases and preventable. The virus just turned up the fire, right?
Yeah.
And to that extent, I'd like to talk a little bit about that before we kind of get into, you know, your social presence on this and a lot of the things that you've talked about, which are, again, we're going to direct a lot of people to your social media, whether the FDA wants that or not. But it's, you know, let's talk a little bit about the numbers. You know, right now we've got 200,000 in the United States, 1 million worldwide, which is a disproportionate number if we look at the number of, you know, sovereign bodies and you know, on the planet. And then even just that number of the number of the people under 30, why is it that Americans represent a disproportionately larger percentage of the total deaths because of this disease?
That is a very good question, Evan. And I'll just say it because it's the unpopular opinion, but true. We have a lot of inflamed, obese, stressed out people with blood sugar dysregulation. And that is the virus's favorite host, right? For a lot of reasons that I've laid out on social media, and we can go into here if you want, but that's it. I mean, it's a disproportionate, we are an obese country, and we have gotten so over the past several decades. I don't know how old you are, Evan. I'm 46, but I watched it happen. I remember seeing this happen from childhood on. I remember seeing fats change from clean animal sources into artificial fats and artificial sugars and all of those things. And I watched the whole food system shift, and I watched everything get very chemicalized, and I watched everyone in my family expand exponentially. And I watched the entire population around me do so. And I'm not lean and thin because I'm gifted with it. I have to work for it. My entire family is obese. So it's a matter of like, this is really happening, and something had to give, right? And you've probably heard me say this before. I saw this coming, and I did. I saw something coming to it. There's no way that the human population could sustain itself that way, particularly the US. There's just no way that we could walk around with that much obesity and comorbidities and not have something come in and wreak havoc like this. You know, it was just a matter of time. And
well, and I think the analogy is almost kind of paramount or tantamount to what we're seeing with the fires, right? As you know, when you've got that much dry kindling floating around, it's like there's a purging fire that's going to happen irregardless, right? And so COVID really has been that for a population of people who, whether, you know, and I think the conversation from a blame perspective is this the fault of the average person who's walking around way overweight, where, you know, I kind of look at it from the standpoint, I'm 41. I saw the same thing. I watched my mom go from sweating to the oldies with Richard Simmons to, you know, Snackwell crackers and cookies because they were no fat or low fat, to now we're back on the Atkins thing and we're pumping everyone with bacon and cheese. It's like, you know, there's been this just circuitous route and the consumers are so misinformed that half the time they don't know what the fuck is going on. Like, what do I eat to be healthy? So yes, there's blame to be, you know, and we need accountability, but to a certain extent, it's like the purging fire is inevitable regardless of you know, the source of it, shall we say.
Yes, I agree. And the thing that no one's come out to say this yet, but if you dig into some zoology, my background was in animal behaviorism and sociology. This has been really interesting to watch how this is all played out with people. And I spent a lot of time studying zoology. Like that was kind of that's what I geeked out on as a kid, right? Viruses cull herds. That's what they do. They take out the sickly and the elderly. That's what they do. And something else no one else is talking about is that as we age, we become more inflamed. I remember being a brand new doctor and treating a whole lot of patients in their 80s. For some reason, I had an onslaught of patients in their 80s that were healthy, really healthy, active folks. But I watched them all slowly but surely creep into diabetes. And I was like, what's going on? They're all lean, they're all active, they all eat well, they're smart, common sense kind of people, farmers, blue collar people who really know how to like they know that if they stop moving, they're going to die, right? So they're very active and very concerned about their diet. And they all ended up with high C-reactive proteins and high diabetes as the years crept up. And I realized that that is a normal part of aging. It's just a normal part of how things go. It's called inflammaging. It's a real thing. And so we've got that coupled with, so people are like, oh, it's old people, or no, it's this group, it's this group. And it's like, no, it's all the same thing. It's, you know, an obese 30-year-old has the stem cells of an 80-year-old. So we've got stem cells here that are not, when in the obese state, stem cells just turn off and they don't turn back on from the studies I found. Same thing with mitochondria. They shut down and they become quiescent and they don't turn back on. And we can talk about regeneration, but what are we regenerating from? We have to regenerate from the cells we have in the body. So if they're shot, what does that mean? And then the same thing with our immune system. Some of our cells in our immune system that reside in our fat cells also shut down and don't turn back on. And so even if you reverse the obesity, how scary is that? So, and I don't know if that's long-term, but there's no studies that I can find on it. And the same thing happens with aging. And so we've got two populations whose immune systems and bodies are acting very similarly for different reasons. One is time and one is the obese state. And so, and I'm not fat shaming, I'm just presenting, this is just information. Mm-hmm. It's a pickle, right? And then we've got a virus that loves that host. And that's where we're at. Like,
I'll be the asshole of the podcast on this one, because it's not fat shaming from a physical perspective. It's fat shaming from the health perspective. And I think that there's been this weird transition where it's like, oh, well, we have to have, you know, these overweight models and all of the catalogs and all that. Like, but are we providing fuel for a COVID fire more than anything, right? It's like, well, if we allow body acceptance in BMIs, if we want to use that measurement, to be acceptable, we're just saying, okay, COVID, go ahead, run rampant, right? And one of the studies that I think you posted online, which I thought was fascinating, is that those T cells, the memory cells, which are so essential in fighting off a virus after the antibodies go away, are kind of shut off in people who have, some major obesity issues. So let's talk a little bit about that. And we can discuss the politics of fat shaming later, but, there needs to be this recognition that if you're carrying around that extra weight, you have a higher probability of any viral issue, whether COVID or not.
Yeah, it's a standalone risk factor. And this is, again, I feel so strongly that we need to be able to talk about this for the sake that it might save lives. And if it's immediately dismissed as fat shaming and I am immediately discounted or you're immediately discounted for talking about it, we're not going to get through this, because I firmly believe, and I have not said this publicly, but I firmly believe that obesity is now driving this epidemic in the United States. Mm-hmm. It is the actual cause, in my opinion. And we are going to stay on slow simmer for a long time, much longer than other countries because of it. And that is what I'm scared about. And that is why I don't understand why the government or the health organizations at large are not discussing the reality of this. I don't know if they're afraid of upsetting people. I don't know if there's going to be immediate pushback, but here's some stats. Speaking of T cells. So we know that with coronaviruses, in this family of virus, there's 4 of them that circulate in the human population, and they cause the common cold. We have no vaccine to these viruses. They are very much like they're in the same, not family, but they are similar in structure and behavior to the flu virus, in that they're single-stranded RNA viruses. So we can kind of assume, based off of what happens with the flu and the obese person, that we can extrapolate. So I'm just extrapolating, and full disclosure, what I'm about to say is in flu. in people with flu. But we know that in the obese state, people with flu, the flu virus, not only carry a significantly higher viral load, and viral load really counts here. We don't want high viral load, but high viral load equates to higher death rates. We don't, or morbidity, I should say, illness, some more severe illness. We don't want a higher viral load. They carry it for up to 42% longer than their lean counterpart, and they shed extremely higher levels than a lean counterpart. And
so meaning they have a higher probability of sharing that virus with others just because of the viral shedding.
they are a bigger vector.
Yeah.
They are a more potent vector. And here's the part, in mouse studies, and we haven't seen this in humans, but in mouse studies, when you put the flu virus through a mouse, we get a virus, we process it in our immune system, and what we excrete out is something different than what came in, because our immune system because the viruses use our own machinery to replicate. So they're going to be morphed and changed by our proteins and by our, cellular coats and all that in our immune system. What comes through a lean mouse tends to be a more gentle virus. We want viruses to go through populations. Viruses don't want to kill their host. They want to spread. And so we need them as a new or novel virus or wild type virus is brought into a host. As it makes its way through the population, if that population is generally healthy, what comes out is usually a kinder, gentler virus. This is not always the case with coronaviruses. They don't mutate as much as a flu virus would. But that's just for like a gross example. That's kind of what we're looking at here. When a flu virus goes through an obese mouse, it comes out more virulent and causes higher morbidity. It actually turns into a more virulent and dangerous virus. So the cocktail that comes out of an obese mouse model, and it becomes more virulent and causes higher morbidity to the lean counterpart in the cage. It makes them sicker.
Mm.
So and that's not fat shaming, right, Tina? I mean, that's just simple. Like the math, the science dictates that, heavier people are causing a greater epidemic or greater pandemic than, their lean counterparts.
Potentially, yes. And so that's a real concern. My dog decided to join us. That's a real concern.
We're a dog-friendly show here.
She's beautiful. She's a little coyote dog.
Yeah.
You'd like her.
Nice.
She hunts mice out in the field all day, and then she comes back into rest, and then she goes back out for more mouse hunting. Then she jumps in the creek to get a little cold exposure, and then she.
Wow, she's a bio-optimized dog.
I love it.
She's good. Okay, so here's the part about antibodies and T cells. With coronaviruses, antibody response is not long lasting. That's why you can, and we have lots of different antibodies that the body produces, but that's why you can get the same cold twice in one winter or one season. That's why you continue to get colds over and over again. There's not long lasting immunity, just like the flu virus. You get partial immunity for a few years. It's not full lasting. And remind me to talk about how this all relates to vaccines.
I was already teeing that up. So,
okay, get ready. I'll forget because there's a lot here. So we're not banking on antibodies, which is a bummer. So people are like, can I get reinfected? Yes, it's looking that way. Yes. And some people have a more robust, longer lasting antibody response because guess what? They're healthier and their immune system works better. So I can't ever say when someone on social media says, hey, Tina, can I get reinfected? I don't know what to tell them, right? I'm like, if you're immunocompromised and you're inflamed, maybe, I don't know how your immune system's working out for you. So what we were banking on is this T memory cell response. And that is not the case with every virus, but luckily enough with this one, there's the first line of your immune system, and then there's the second line, and there's a communication. I look at the first line really, I mean, this is just a gross example, but this is, I think of them as the Marines. They come in, they're non-discriminant, they just blow shit up and try to identify the villain and just kill. And
that would be your innate immune system, correct?
Yes. And that is not to say that that's how the Marines work. I know they're more calculated than that, but just go with, I don't want to offend any Marines, but just go with me on this. It's just like, hey, first line defense, the virus is evading parts of that system in and of itself. That's how it works. So that's kind of a bummer. It's kind of like a stealth ninja. And then there's a communication pathway over to the Navy SEALs, which is your adaptive immune response. And that line of communication can be flawed in people who are immunocompromised or chronically ill or maybe obese or elderly. Like we need that. So that's the second part where things can go wrong. First, we've got immune system evasion. Then we have maybe communication lines aren't clear. And then the second part, the Navy SEALs, they're more calculated and specific. And of them, the T cells, there's like killer T cells, there's all kinds of T cells, there's T memory cells, and they remind the body how to make antibodies against invaders later. So we really want that whole system working well. Well, guess where the T cells live? In your fat cells. And if your fat cells are inflamed, the only way I can liken it from what I've read is like it turns into a shit show. Basically, those T killer cells go rogue and they become very pissed off and start cranking out cytokines. And you've got like, it's like they turn into gremlins if you feed the gizmo after midnight. And then the T memory
throw
cells,
water on them.
Yeah, the T cells basically, the T memory cells that we need to show up later, like if coronavirus comes around a few years later, you want those T memory cells working, they basically turn off or die. And there's not much of them to be found there. So your fat cells are little depots for your T cells. And if those fat cells are inflamed, this is the thing with the health at every size model hypothesis. I don't know if someone's fat cells are inflamed. I can't tell by looking at them. Is it a matter of how long they've had those fat cells filled to the hilt? Is it a matter of how their diet is or their lifestyle or their adverse childhood events? I don't know. All I can tell is with labs. I'd have to run labs. So when people say health at every size, I'm like, show me your metabolic markers and I'll tell you if you're healthy at every size. Because guess what? Skinny fat people who are metabolically unsound but are lean, actually have a higher death rate from everything than obese people who are medically unsound. So, or metabolically unsound. So we just don't want metabolically unsound. That's a real problem here. But anyway, those T memory cells, for all intents and purposes, in the obese state we can't count on them. So that means potentially no immunity to this virus, which means that's what I'm talking about, that slow simmer. And it's just going to keep coming back around and slow cooking because we have a population that basically is the perfect substrate for it.
And we're not getting healthier.
No. And like I said, if these mitochondria, which are your cellular powerhouses, as your audience I'm sure knows, if the stem cells, mitochondria, and T memory cells are quiescent or dead, and it's irreversible in all three cases from what I'm finding, and don't slaughter me here because there might be more literature out there, like for your audience who's like, I don't believe that. Please find literature to support otherwise. But if that's the case, then is this even reversible? Like, is getting lean and healthy right now? I mean, of course, it's going to start to lower inflammation and it's going to start to do good things for the body. But are they going to be as healthy as if they had stayed lean? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that
Interesting thought.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably there's not going to be a lot of literature that's going to be able to, in a double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial, evaluate that. But I think the extrapolative math would dictate that if you've been inflamed for decades, the probability of kind of recovering some of that over a long enough period of time, you're never going to be as if you were to start off healthy and continue to be healthy your entire life. But
Yes.
So before we get into vaccines, though, which I think is something, if we look at, let's talk about metabolic inflexibility, let's talk about mitochondrial dysfunction or even insulin resistance. If we're starting to see some therapies like stem cells, like PRP, where we can re-inject a host with outside stem cells, is there a probability that if someone were to follow a healthy path, if they were to lose the weight, if they were to reduce inflammation, inflammatory markers, and then introduce additional stem cells, mesenchymal through, injection or whatnot, is there a probability from a scientific perspective that we could start to get ahead of some of those deficiencies that came from years and years and years of living in an unhealthy way?
Well, the thing is there's no such thing as outside stem cells. That's a misnomer, and it's a lie that goes around the regenerative community. When you think you're buying a vial of something that's mesenchymal stem cells that are umbilical, there's no stem cells in there. They're actually all dead. There's growth factors, but the FDA would never allow a product like that to get out. And I did a whole podcast about it. If anyone wants to listen on my podcast, episode 69, you just can't.
It's a fun number.
I know, it was
ironic. I was waiting for it. I did it with Dr. Sabrina Solt, and she was like, I love our number. That's so fun. But so there's no such thing as getting someone else's stem cells or getting umbilical stem cells. There are exosomes, but those are just the molecular messenger of stem cells, and they are from placenta and they are from another host. All of these treatments can only make your body do better what it's already doing. So again, if you're starting with quiescent stem cells, mitochondria, and immune system, you can only replicate off what you have. I mean,
I mean, unless I'm wrong, you know, I don't know where else, like you don't just generate new mitochondria out of nowhere. They have to come from your previous mitochondria. You can regenerate, meaning, you know, take what you have and start to, like, you can build muscle mass, which I know you guys are fans of, and you can make more mitochondria based off what you have, but you can't, like, you don't just bud out new mitochondria out of nowhere, nor is the case with your stem cells. So again, like, you can optimize the person. I think optimization is the key here, but what you got to optimize what you start with, you know? So where's your starting substrate and how much work can you do with that? Like if I were to have found strength training and intermittent fasting and, you know, an anti-inflammatory diet when I was 20, my life would be significantly different than it is now. But I didn't really get into all that stuff until my 30s. And so
Well, and look, we use the analogy of the 401k, and I just remember I said this the other day on, you know, my first job, the 401k rep comes in when you're 20 and says, you know, if you start investing now, when you retire, here's how much your 401k is. If you wait till you're 40 or 50, here's how much it is. So, yeah, I mean, it's just a perfect example. And it doesn't start in your 20s. It starts when, you know, you're a baby. It starts when, you know, and so for the parents listening out there, like, really pay attention to this, right? You know, the snacks that you have in the cupboard that, you know, you think are harmless because eventually, you know, they're going to go to school and they're going to burn off all that stuff. No. It's like, start now.
it's so
Earlier the
critical.
better, that's for sure.
So
Gosh, prenatal health, like that's everything. And then, you know,
yeah. And I think you know, when I first started in the dietary supplement space, I developed prenatal vitamins, and my goal was to, you know, develop about 25% of the global prenatal vitamins. And I've hit that. And I did that, you know, focusing on, you know, innovation in respect to what do we know about prenatal health and postnatal health now that we didn't know 30 years ago or 40 years ago when, you know, my mom was popping prenatal vitamins, probably downing them with whiskey too. I don't know. You know?
and
makes a lot of
Valium.
Makes a lot of, well,
And
it's
cigarette.
like back then it was like, you know, hey, you know, just, you know, you go to the doctor in the 50s and 60s and say, doc, I want to lose weight. And the response was, start smoking.
Yeah.
Oh.
And
Oh, wow.
here's some uppers to keep you from getting hungry.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. You know, here's a methamphetamine and a pack of Marlboro Reds. I think that's a perfect transition into, let's talk about vaccines, and not just
Okay.
COVID, but let's, you know, I think what we're seeing right now in all of the news is get your flu shot. You know, let's get out in front of COVID and flu season. Would love to get your take on all of this and kind of your opinion on the vaccine position.
Okay, so about the flu shot, again, I am extrapolating here, but a study came out early on in this pandemic showing that, I believe it was in the Navy, that those who had received the flu shot had a more extreme case of COVID that had come through the base. And I have those studies if you guys want me to get them to you. And I thought, that's interesting, because here's the thing, and I am, like, full disclosure. First of all, I'm not anyone's doctor, and this is all for educational purposes, and I'm not giving health advice. And second of all, I am not anti-vaccine. I am not pro-vaccine. I am pro-informed consent. So I am pro-understanding what's going on. And when you choose to really look at informed consent, that means educating the patient about all of this. And that's what I've been trying to do on social media, is like give the whole picture, because there's a lot to this for those who actually want to listen. There is something in, and this is literally how vaccines work. They add an adjuvant. They add something called an adjuvant. And these are now mercury, misnomer. People think mercury is an adjuvant. It's not. It's a stabilizing heavy metal that they put as a preservative. Adjuvants would be something like aluminum. What that means is with vaccines, they give you an alterated or an adulterated or a killed virus. Sometimes they're partially live. And they're so basically beat up that they're designed not to kill you, right? They're designed to, like, they're very weakened or dead or just partial. And hopefully the body mounts an immune response. Now, that's a slow and arduous process. So they add something called an adjuvant, which makes the body go, wow. It makes, you know, you inject in the dead virus particulate, and there's an adjuvant involved, and then the immune system goes, all hell break loose, mount an immune response. That's why sometimes people get really sick after they get the flu vaccine, or any vaccine for that matter, because sometimes those adjuvants can cause a robust immune reaction that they weren't counting on. Again, I'm not saying vaccines are wrong or evil. I think that in many cases, many lives have been saved from them. So I'm kind of in the middle. But if we give someone a flu vaccine right now full of adjuvant, and it is designed to make the body hyperreact to a viral infection, what happens when the person gets COVID? Because we're all going to be exposed to the virus at some point. So that to me is very interesting. And I'm wondering if that had something to do with why all those people on that Navy base got sicker, is potentially because, and more died. Is it because they had an adjuvant in their system? So anyway, just interesting, something I've been thinking about. But here's the thing, we know with the flu vaccine, for sure, and we've seen studies for over a decade on this, people who are in the obese state, elderly state, or chronically immunocompromised state do not mount the appropriate immune response to the flu vaccine, and the flu vaccine doesn't work nearly as well or at all on them. If that's the population that is most at risk for contracting and dying of COVID-19, why do we think a vaccine to this virus would be any different? People in that category that are most vulnerable don't respond to vaccines.
Makes sense.
Interesting.
Those people are at home hiding with masks on, banking on the vaccine to save them, when I'm like, hey buddy, the vaccine is not actually going to work on you. And then we have what I just described, which is potential. And again, a lot of this is theory. I've talked to a lot of my friends who are experts in immunology and virology, and everybody's being very positive. And I'm like, am I wrong here? Like everything I just told you guys about how the immune system, we know how it works. And we know this about vaccines, like, where am I missing the mark? And I think, I don't think I am. I think my prediction here is correct. And I know it's scary and uncomfortable for people, but it's like, if we're going to stay on slow simmer and not mount an immune response, and the vaccine's probably not going to work on that population, then what are we to do? And potentially turning that ship around for that patient may not be as easy as we think. We can't undo time on the elderly. The elderly are just going to keep getting older and more inflamed and more metabolically unsound, because that's just how it works as we age. And the obese person, if we help them lose the weight, and you guys probably know this as well, metabolically, you don't even see shifts on labs for about 90 days.
Yeah.
When you when you write the ship with someone and you go to run markers on them again, it's like, well, metabolically, a month in, people demand labs in a month because they've been doing paleo for the month, and they're like, I'm ready. Or they did the whole 30 and they're like, let's run labs. And I'm like, you're not going to see anything change yet. So if it takes that much time to shift the metabolism back, and we don't even know if we can turn some of those cells back on to optimal, like, I don't know what that means. And that's what I've been trying to express on social media. And I'm getting hammered on there about it because it's not great news.
It's not. And I think that there's got to be some acceptance that, we're up shit creek without a paddle. But I guess I want to offer you the opportunity to discuss this. And is there a silver lining in any of it?
I was just going to ask, like, what is the solution here? Yeah.
Or do we just begin the orgy and
cinnamon?
Is it just anarchy in the end of the world and we just go out with a big party?
I don't know, but I am, as somebody who suffered from depression and suicidal ideation and is the mother of someone who, like, I literally had just pulled my daughter through the darkest time in the world when this whole pandemic hit. And I'm like literally having a front row, like movie to this whole pandemic, because I've got people, because my videos went viral, 2 of them, and so I got a ton of followers from all over the world. And guess what all the ICU nurses from all over the world are telling me? Yes, I'm correct. 99.9% of the patients who are dying in their units are obese and diabetic, and this virus causes you to go into a diabetic state, as does most viruses that put strain on your body. You will, for a short time, have a window of where you become a little bit diabetic and have hyper glucose, like hyper blood sugars, high blood sugars. And that's putting people at a much more unstable situation. And they're like, yeah, this is what's happening. That it's in a lot of elderly folks are actually making it out, if they're healthy elderly folks. And so I think we know what the concern is. And is there a conversation that we actually quarantine the obese and the elderly? Like, what about changing health public health mandates? Because masking up, here's the part that, again, no one's talking about. Masking up, completely remove. I'm not anti-mask either. I am like, can we be like pro-mask where it's appropriate, and also maybe not wear them at the bus stop when no one else is around you, right? Like, can we just be logical about the freaking mask? Because everyone's freaking out about the masks. And I'm like, if you don't expose your immune system to other people's microbiome and to give your thymus gland a chance to exercise really and do its immune thing, you become more immunocompromised. So slowly but surely, this isolation and this masking and this hyper hand sanitization and this whole thing is like causing people's immune systems to not be so robust and great. And they're quarantined and they're isolated, which we know causes immunocompromise and inflammation at the same time. So like we have a group of people we kept locked down. Like, why didn't they let us out in the summer and then lock us down? Like, as a responsible society, I'm all for quarantining, I'm all for masking, but like, I think this could have been done in a way where we use the natural harmony of the seasons, because there's a seasonality to viruses. This one will likely come back, and there's a seasonality to our immune system. So like, and circadian rhythms, like why didn't we pay attention to that when we had the opportunity? Because now we're all immunocompromised and we're all stressed out.
And I was just going to say that we didn't travel for a bit, and we had this conversation about, oh, I wonder what our immune systems, are they as strong now? Because we haven't been traveling, we haven't been exposing ourselves to people or just like outside. We kind of have just been quarantined. And then we flew somewhere, we traveled, and then afterwards we both agreed we don't feel like I don't feel strong. Like I feel like I've had like a weird throat thing ever since we got back, and you can physically feel it when you're not exposing yourself to others or travel or just like outside, basically.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you do it. I know we noticed it.
Well, and I look at it, for the past couple of years, I've flown an average of 150 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on a plane multiple times a week. I didn't get a flu. I didn't get a cold. I mean, like my immune system was the Navy SEALs,
right.
On steroids.
And then
now
we travel once with masks and hand sanitizer, and you come back and you're like, I don't feel right. And it's like, well, shit, like we were good. And then I don't know.
Herd immunity makes sense. And there, whether that's COVID or not is, we need to bolster our immune systems. And I think that this really comes back. I want to talk to you about this, right? Because for a long time, you couldn't buy vitamin C anywhere.
Yeah.
You couldn't buy zinc. People were snorting echinacea.
Yeah.
It's, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't assume any treatment prevention, or I've never assumed that with a virus though, because viruses do what they please, and they're tiny and they get where they need to get, and they find the host they need to get to, right? And they're aerosolized. I mean, they do what they want to do. So there's no hiding from them. So let's just put that aside. Everybody needs to stop trying to hide. We will all be exposed. And then it's a matter of like, I keep thinking of the Hunger Games, like may the odds be ever in your favor. I am a sitting duck. I have lung issues and I suffer from chronic pneumonia. I am concerned, but I'm not going to live my life in fear. I have two parents in their 70s who are both immunocompromised. I may lose one. I kind of expect to be honest. And it's devastating because the thought of not having my mother in my life is crippling. But still, it's the old people that are the most insubordinate. All the old people I've talked to, they do not give a fuck. They're like, let me out. I'm going to hug my grandchildren. And what we're doing to people in extended care facilities is just criminal. Like that's a whole other conversation we could talk about. But so, I think of nutrients as just stabilizing different systems of the body. And so in my head, vitamin C does a lot of great things. It helps you with collagen synthesis, and that's what I'm most familiar with in my regenerative orthopedic land. But it also does really nice things for your immune system. It keeps things modulated, and it really helps with lung health. It helps with capillary fragility, meaning you don't bleed a ton. That's why, when you're low in vitamin C, you'll bruise a lot, et cetera. And so we want all of those things working in our favor if we were to come across any kind of upper respiratory virus, right? So I don't look at vitamin C as like treating or preventing or curing anything. I look at it as helping those systems behave better. And there's a lot of other cool things vitamin C does. But zinc actually inhibits viral replication in many ways. And that's where this, I'm not an expert on hydroxychloroquine, but I do wonder why they weren't. Hydroxychloroquine is just an ionophore to get zinc into the cell. So as a standalone drug treatment or therapy, I can understand why some of the studies haven't been favorable, but also like, where was the zinc, and was zinc used at adequate doses? Because most people I found in my practice are zinc deficient, including myself. And a good way to tell is, do you get these little white spots on your nails? Do you heal well from?
I think we both just look like, okay.
Yeah, because I have one and I have never had none, but I used to have a ton on all my nails. And so zinc deficiency, super common. It's actually one of the first things I think of when I think of anorexic girls, young girls going anorexic and being stricken with anxiety, is like, we got to get some zinc on board. Zinc keeps people sane. It keeps them happy. It keeps their anxiety low, but it also helps keep your immune system orchestrating well. So not just working or robust, or I'm not trying to boost any immune system, but just orchestrating that whole conversation we had earlier about the different lines of defense and that communication channel, and it keeps viral replication lowered. And so we want zinc on board for any kind of winter time. I mean, it's like I have a go-to pack every winter that I go to. I take my C, I take my zinc, I make sure my vitamin D is optimized, because vitamin D, and we have so many studies showing COVID-19 and vitamin D having a correlation there. So just, again, it's terrain. Like, is the human being robust enough to handle an onslaught from a foreign invader in their body, is more my take on things. And so having vitamin D optimized, for me, it's like getting out in the sun is key. I know you guys are, you guys always look so healthy and tan. So, getting out there and getting sunlight. N-acetylcysteine is a great supplement in that it is the cofactor. It becomes glutathione in the body, and glutathione is a major intracellular antioxidant. We need glutathione on board anytime our body is under duress and from a foreign invader. We really need that intracellular glutathione high and adequate. And again, there's studies showing COVID-19 and glutathione having an impact. So it's never a treatment, prevention, or cure in my head as a naturopathic doctor. It's always, can I make the human being more resilient to infection of any sort? And movement, we got, like, stagnant ponds collect scum, right? Anybody who's not moving or sweating on the regular is putting themselves in a predicament. And getting the body hot induces the ability for heat shock proteins to turn on and keep any infection from not taking hold as strongly. And so there's just these common sense things that we're suddenly not allowed to talk about. But it's, again, it's not about this virus or any other virus. It's just about, like, not going down in the winter from any kind of infection that rolls your way.
Well, and these are practices that you can do day in and day out that are going to, they're going to pump up the Navy SEALs and the Marines, right? Like, it's not about COVID. It's about being healthy. It's about doing the things day in and day out that are going to give you a better chance, whether it's COVID-19, COVID-23, or the zombie apocalypse.
The flu,
yeah.
and like for me, getting hit with cytomegalovirus at 19, that's a virus that really only impacts strongly. At the time, they were like, we've only seen HIV patients get sick with this. And so, of course, back then, it was like the early 90s, and they're running HIV panels on me, which take weeks to come back at that time. It was terrifying. And then to go into a chronic post-viral syndrome with it, where it impacted my psyche and my brain. And I had to get pulled out of school at 19, and I almost died. So I get this. And I've been using these nutrients to keep myself healthy from that my whole life, and it doesn't impact me anymore, but it led to all kinds of problems down the line. And so, and there's people with chronic Epstein-Barr virus. And can I just mention this long hauler thing? I'm so tired of that being the argument. I realize there's post-viral syndrome with this virus, and it's scary, but there's post-viral syndrome, severe post-viral syndrome with many, many viruses, including the flu, and no one ever talks about it. So this is not a new phenomenon to be terrified of. This is just something we have to expect, and we know how to deal with, and we can help patients on the other side of things, right? We can help with that brain inflammation. We can help with the vascular changes that might occur. But again, if you go into it as robust as possible, those things are minimized. At least that's the goal, right? That's what we're all hoping for. We can't, it's not a, cross it on the line and say, I'm going to be fine, but we can just hope to support the host as much as we can from any infectious process.
So I think we like to give our listeners some action items, and you talk a lot about optimizing a terrain. So what else can they do aside from supplementation? Is that diagnostic tests? I mean, is that what you would recommend someone start off with, is instead of just adding some things or supplements to their lifestyle, maybe get some tests done and see where they're at metabolically? And
for sure. But even then, I always say, when new patients come in the door, I'm like, why are we going to test you now? Because I know it's going to be a shit show. I can just tell, right? So something I've been telling everybody on Instagram, which I think is just good common sense, and I've been getting, you guys would be so amazed. When I was trying to actively get patients to lose weight in practice, it was so difficult. I have cumulatively helped people, I think we're like at thousands of pounds weight loss at this point since this all started. Three
Wow.
things. I told them to cut sugar because sugar just tanks out your immune system and it basically makes it behave like it's drunk. So sugar is not what we want on board right now. It's not about like calories or anything. It's just sugar in and of itself does bad things to your immune system. 2, go for a walk every day. And 3, just optimize your sleep. Just freaking go to bed.
Yeah.
Go to bed at a normal time. Don't be binge watching all night on whatever. Just go to bed.
Especially
and get
the
up
news.
Oh my God. Yeah. Like turn off everything and go to bed. So walking, cutting sugar, and going to bed. And I'm getting messages from people showing me that I can't share because they're private, but extreme weight loss in a short amount of time. They're like, that's all I did. Like they hadn't even implemented, you know, measuring their macros or anything like that. Like nothing that you would think, just simple shit like that. And their stress is lowered and the weight is falling off of them. And I think those are key. So that's what I would say.
Our body is supposed to do, it responds how it should, right?
Yeah.
So it's quite simple actually.
Move, sleep, and eat well.
Right.
Wow.
And
who would have thought?
That's so novel.
Right. Like as simple as that. And I'm like, man, I've gotten some great clinical results with that. Right. I mean, I'm not giving them advice, but I mean, those are my suggestions and people are implementing and having really great success. So.
You know, it's amazing in a world that's so polarized right now, and especially in a country that's so polarized, it's amazing how common sense can percolate to the top and be like, oh, just do the shit you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So we are kind of coming up on our time limit here. So I think we could talk for hours on this. So I think one other thing that I want to discuss real fast is we're in Northern California with the fires. You're in Oregon with the fires. Yeah. We know that, you know, the ash particulate matter can be very harmful for the lungs, especially as we're going into flu and maybe a more robust COVID season. So as we talk about that, are there some things that people can do in those specific areas to help optimize lung function so that they might be better prepared for a viral host later on?
Yeah. So the ash, the particulate from wildfires that gets into the lungs and settles down creates very much the same response as an infectious organism. And I personally, every time we have fires here in the Pacific Northwest, I end up with pneumonia the next winter, like clockwork. So I'm a little concerned, to be honest with you, but I do the very same thing that I would otherwise. So this is what I do for fires: vitamin C, zinc, vitamin D, NAC, glutathione, if you can, instead of the NAC, and elderberry. Like that's what I do. That has nothing to do with viruses. That's just what I do. And that's what I have given my patients who've been exposed to wildfires and even firefighters that I've seen. And so that just helps keep the lungs. That's just lung health 101. Keeps them nice and happy, keeps them working optimally, keeps the surfactant levels high. So that would be my recommendation. And using them, you know, the thing about lungs is they like to become fibrotic. And so this is where some cardiovascular, some sweating comes in. The lungs like to pump, they're an organ. So keeping them moving, giving yourself a little cardio, maybe a brisk walk or a quick run, nothing too major. We don't want to hyperoxidize our systems with exercise, but you know, giving yourself a little bit of a workout till you're breathless a bit is going to be helpful too.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. That's great. That's a great, and I mean, that's just great advice anyway.
Yeah. Just for general health.
Now, one quick thing, because you talked about elderberry, and I think that there's been a lot of confusion about some of these things, whether it's, you know, medicinal mushrooms, you know, not the hallucinogenic kind, but, you know, elderberry, all of these things that they actually have been shown to increase pro-inflammatory cytokines, but it would appear that would be more in the inflamed population. So, you know, how do we navigate some of the, you know, the literature on this, and you know, since COVID seems every day, it's like, what do we know today, or what do we not know today? So, what is your suggestion on just some dietary supplements that seem to be a little kind of confusing when it comes to this?
I have friends who are herbalists who are way better at this than I am, so I will just disclose with that. But I've asked all of them, and they've thrown massive amounts of studies at me showing that that's false. So. Okay. It's more of when you think of nutraceuticals, think more in terms of modulation. Now, some of them are pro immune response, but generally herbs tend to be, because they're whole plant, they tend to just be, or partial plant, they tend to be much more modulating than like a drug that is, you know, hyper processed down to get an active constituent to drive a metabolic system forward. So I think in the case of elderberry, I saw many studies come across, and I have many of my colleagues that I could refer you guys to who disprove that. And we're not even seeing, then I've seen a study that came out showing that it was bradykinins and not cytokines that's causing the meltdown in the COVID patients. And so we don't know, but I'm not too concerned. Elderberry will give you diarrhea if you take too much.
That's all we know.
as will many of them. And so I will say this, find someone who is knowledgeable. There are herbalists, there are nutritional therapists, there are other people in everyone's community who are very affordable that can help guide you on your own nutraceutical journey. These are not appropriate for everyone. Dosage really varies on each person. And you certainly don't want to take too much zinc as an example, because it can tank your immune system. Above a certain milligram, it can actually be immunoinhibiting. And so this is not something to tread lightly into. Find someone that can help you who's knowledgeable in whatever capacity, whatever career path they're on, and get some good advice that way.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, the other thing too is, start with the basics, like you talked about, is move, get some of the basics going before you go crazy and start adding, all of these different cocktails, all the things that, you can find on Amazon that are going to support and bolster your immune system. Cause a lot of it's bullshit, right? At the end of the day, it's, we have to take care of the basics, the foundational pieces before we can move into some of the more advanced. And there are great people out there that can help with this. But, interestingly enough, one of our neighbors down the street here is the head of the ICCU at UC Davis. And, he's ground zero for COVID. And you ask him, what do you know about COVID today? And he's like, less than I knew yesterday. So,
Changes all the time.
It's
so much information out there.
much information. But I think the one thing I do want to come back to finish this out is something that you really talked about was the death rates. And, it's something to be very aware of. We spent the last hour talking about it, but it's also, at 0.0002% or whatever it is for specific demographics, be wary, but also let's not hide in a cave and come out 30 years later. I think of that movie with Brendan Fraser where they go underground for like 30 years. Like we don't have to do that.
Yeah. So basically, if you're under the age of 70, you have a 99% plus, 99.5 and up percent chance of surviving this, unless you might fall into that obese or inflamed state, which a lot of Americans do. So again, get with someone who can help. Like, you mentioned, Janna, like get with someone who can help assess that, maybe with labs, who knows, whatever it takes. And, or just do some of the common sense things we're talking about. And if you're over the age of 70, yeah, there is it increases, but I think it's 94.5% chance of survival. So this is not turning out to be, as the data rolls in, this is not turning out to be as deadly as we thought.
Yeah. And it's, as you talked about, it's mitigating some of the, the post-viral stuff, but that's all just, that's going to happen, whether it's the flu, whether it's another virus, whether it's this. So, this is probably prepping us for, some of the shit that's going to come down the pike the next time someone eats a pangolin and, we end up with this. But, it's, if COVID has done anything, it's a giant, wake up call that we have to be healthier day in and day out.
Yeah, for sure. I think the population at large is in a pickle, and we need to get our shit together.
Well said.
Absolutely.
Dr. Tyna Moore, where can people find you?
I think the best place right now is Instagram. I can only manage one platform and all the vitriol that comes with it. So Instagram is it for me right now. And it's just at Dr. Tyna, DRTYNA. And I have a great free book that lays out the 6 pillars and foundations that I think you have to master in your health. And it's very helpful for this and anything else that comes your way, including pain. And that can be found at drtyna.com. And I have a podcast as well. I would love to have you guys on. It's called Pain Free Strong Radio, and that's at painfreestrongradio.com. And I talk a lot about this a little bit more openly on the podcast if you guys want that info.
Do you have a safe word on your podcast?
No, but I just, I know I'm a doctor. I know how to weave conversations.
Right.
Again, everybody should have a safe word. So can we be episode 169?
Oh my God.
Yes. Let's plan on it.
Cinnamon.
Cinnamon.
So
Awesome,
great.
you guys.
Dr. Tyna, thank you. I think this was amazing information and a great resource. So thank you so much for everything you've shared with us.
Yes,
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
Yep. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll put all of her information in the show notes. Make sure to follow her at all the places that she just said. Check out her free book online, her podcast, and then definitely check out her Instagram, some fascinating information and give you some food for thought, especially as we're kind of in this COVID pickle as we discussed. So, all right. Anything else?
No, that's it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to another episode of I almost said my other podcast name.
I would smack you.
I would
Say cinnamon again.
The Complete Human Podcast with your host,
Janna Breslin.
and Evan DeMarco. Until next week,
Be well. Bye, guys.
take care.